I still remember the sound the jewelry box made when I opened it for the last time. It wasn't loud, just a small, tired creak, like it already knew what I was about to do. That box had followed me through every stage of my life. I bought it when I was 22, back when I still believed in things like forever and someday. It sat on my dresser through marriage, childbirth, divorce, and years of exhaustion I never talk about out loud. Inside were the pieces of myself I hadn't entirely given away yet. My wedding band, a thin gold bracelet my mother gave me, a pair of earrings I wore to my first real job interview. I didn't open it often, but when I did, I felt like I was looking at proof that I once mattered as a person, not just as someone's mother. That morning, I lifted each piece slowly. I didn't cry. I was too busy calculating. Textbooks, housing, fees, meal plan. My son's college acceptance letter was still pinned to the fridge, curling at the edges. A good school, a proud moment. Everyone told me how lucky I was. "You must be so excited," they said. "You did a great job raising him," they said. No one asked how I was going to pay for it. I didn't tell my son I sold the jewelry. I didn't want him to feel guilty. That's what mothers do. We protect our children from the cost of loving them. At the pawn shop, the man behind the counter weighed my life in his hands like it was nothing more than metal. "This is old," he said. "Yes," I answered. "I can give you this much." "Okay." I nodded, signed, and walked out lighter in ways I wouldn't understand until years later. That money paid for his first semester, and I never told anyone that on the way home, I sat in my car and stared at my empty hands for a long time, wondering when I had stopped belonging to myself. I raised my son alone after his father left. People like to romanticize single motherhood, but the truth is less poetic. It's standing in grocery store aisles counting dollars. It's pretending you're not tired when your bones ache. It's working jobs that don't respect you because your child needs shoes that fit. I worked as a receptionist during the day and cleaned offices at night. I missed birthdays. I missed school plays. I missed myself, but I was always there when he needed me. I remember nights when he couldn't sleep. He'd crawl into my bed, his small body shaking from dreams he didn't understand yet. "Mom," he'd whisper, "don't go." "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." I believed that went both ways. College changed him faster than I expected. At first, he called every week, then every other week, then once a month. I told myself that was normal. He was busy. He was growing. That's what success looks like, right? When I did hear from him, the conversations were short. "Hey, Mom, how are you eating?" "Fine." "Are you sleeping?" Yeah, listen, I gotta go." I never said, "I miss you." I didn't want to be the reason his voice sounded tired. When he graduated, I cried so hard my chest hurt. I clapped until my hands burned. I watched him walk across that stage in a borrowed cap and gown, knowing parts of me were stitched into every step he took. After the ceremony, he hugged me quickly. "Thanks, Mom," he said. Just that. Not, "I couldn't have done this without you." Not, "I know what you gave up." Just, "Thanks." Like I'd held a door open, not a life together. The first time he called me a burden, it wasn't loud. It was casual. I had been sick for a few days. Nothing serious, just dizzy, weak. I called him because I was scared and alone, and that still felt like something a mother was allowed to do. He sighed when he picked up. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. I won't take long. What's wrong now?" Now. I don't feel well. I thought maybe, "Mom, you can't keep doing this. I have responsibilities." I waited for him to realize how that sounded. Instead, he added, "I can't always be worrying about you." Worrying about me. I thought about the nights I stayed awake counting his breaths when he had a fever. I thought about the jewelry box. I understand, I said quietly. But after the call ended, my apartment felt different, smaller, colder, like I was something taking up space where I no longer belonged. I stopped calling after that, not out of anger, out of shame. I didn't want to be that mother, the one people talk about, the one who doesn't know her place. So I learned how to sit with silence. I ate dinners alone. I folded laundry slowly. I watched other people's children on social media grow closer to their parents, while mine drifted further away. Sometimes I'd reach for the jewelry box without thinking, then remember it was gone. That's when the pain would surprise me. Not sharp, just deep, settled, like something missing that never comes back. After that phone call, I started paying attention to how much space I took up in the world. I noticed it in small ways first. The way I lowered my voice when speaking to cashiers. The way I hesitated before sitting down in waiting rooms, as if I needed permission. The way I reread text messages before sending them, deleting anything that sounded like a need. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone, especially not to my own son. I told myself this was maturity, independence, the natural order of things. Children grow up, parents fade into the background. That's what people say anyway. They say it like it's gentle, like it doesn't involve loss. My days became predictable. Wake up early, even though I no longer had to. Old habits die hard. Make coffee for one. Sit by the window and watch the neighborhood wake up. Other people's lives unfolding while mine stayed still. I worked part-time at the local library now. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, and no one expected much from me. I liked that. The books didn't need me. They didn't ask questions. They didn't grow up and leave. Sometimes college students would come in, stressed and tired, their backpacks heavy with possibility. I'd catch myself wondering if any of their mothers had sold something precious so they could sit there tapping away at laptops, unaware of the cost. I never told them. Sacrifice doesn't announce itself. It just disappears. My health started slipping in ways that were easy to ignore. A pain here, a weakness there. The kind of things you tell yourself are just part of getting older. I was in my late 50s by then. People expect less from your body. They expect you to complain, and I didn't want to be predictable. So I didn't tell my son when I started feeling dizzy again. I didn't tell him when I had to sit down halfway through grocery shopping because my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I told myself, he has responsibilities. That phrase stayed with me. Responsibilities. Like I wasn't one of them anymore. When I finally went to the doctor, I went alone. I sat on the exam table, paper crinkling beneath me, staring at a poster about heart health. The nurse asked if someone was coming with me. No, I said quickly, too quickly. She nodded, like she understood. Maybe she did. The diagnosis wasn't dramatic, nothing that makes people drop everything. Just something chronic, something that would require monitoring, medication, lifestyle changes. Something inconvenient. I remember thinking, good, at least it wasn't something that would force me to call my son. He visited once that year. Not because I asked, because he was in town for work. He called me from his hotel. "I've got a couple hours free," he said. "We can grab coffee or something." Or something. I cleaned my apartment like royalty was coming. I wiped down surfaces no one touches. I straightened picture frames he never looked at. I wore a sweater I knew made me look healthier than I felt. When he arrived, he looked older, taller somehow, more confident. He hugged me, but it was brief, careful, like he was afraid of committing to the moment. "You look fine," he said. scanning me the way people do when they're checking off boxes. Fine. That was good. Fine meant I wasn't a problem. We sat at my small kitchen table. I offered him tea. He declined. He checked his phone. He talked about work, promotions, stress, his apartment, his plans. I listened. I always listened. That was still my role. At one point, I mentioned the library job. That's good, he said. Keeps you busy. Busy. Not fulfilled. Not happy. Just busy. Like that was enough for someone like me. I almost told him about the doctor, about the dizziness, about how sometimes at night the silence pressed so hard on my chest I couldn't breathe. But then he glanced at his watch. I should get going, he said. Early meeting. I nodded, smiled, walked him to the door. At the threshold he paused. "You're doing okay, right?" he asked. There it was, the opening, the chance. I could have told him the truth. Instead, I said, "Of course." He looked relieved, and just like that, the moment passed. After he left, I stood in the doorway longer than I needed to. The apartment felt emptier than before, like his presence had reminded the walls what absence really meant. I sat down and let myself cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to release the pressure. I cried for the jewelry, for the years, for the version of motherhood I thought I was earning. I cried because I realized something I had been avoiding. I had raised my son to survive without me, and he had done it perfectly. I started writing letters after that, not to send, just to write. I wrote about the nights I stayed up sewing buttons back onto his coats, about the lunches I skipped so he could have seconds, about the way I used to sit outside his room when he was sick, listening to him breathe, afraid the sound might stop. I wrote about the jewelry box. I wondered if he would care. Then I folded the letters and put them in a drawer. I didn't want to guilt him. I didn't want to be heavy. I didn't want to be a burden, even in ink. So the letters stayed where they were, like me. It started with small things, a faint dizziness that made me drop my coffee cup in the morning, spilling it across the kitchen floor, a missed step on the stairs that left my ankle sore for days. Things I could still hide, things I could still fix before anyone noticed. But the body doesn't lie forever. One afternoon, I tripped in the supermarket. Not a dramatic fall, just a stumble. I caught myself on the edge of the freezer door, heart racing, hands shaking. A few people glanced. I nodded, embarrassed, and kept walking. No one asked if I was okay. No one called. Not even him. I knew I could have. I could have called my son, explained what happened, asked him to come. But the word burden was already lodged in my chest like a splinter. I am a burden. I had lived long enough to know this truth wasn't about him, it was about me, about the years I had spent putting him first, carving out every inch of my existence to make space for him. And now there was nothing left of me but shadows in an empty apartment. It was a Wednesday when it finally became impossible to ignore. I was at home alone, and I felt it first in my chest, a sharp, pressing weight that made breathing difficult. My hands trembled. I sat on the edge of the couch, gripping the cushions, praying it would pass. It didn't. I tried calling the nurse's office, then my primary doctor. The line was busy. I realized I couldn't wait. I had to get to the hospital myself. I fumbled with my keys, walked to the car slowly, my body aching in every place it had long ignored pain. The drive was terrifying. Every red light felt like a countdown. Every bump in the road made me question whether I would make it. When I finally pulled into the ER, I felt both relief and shame. Relief that help was near, shame that I had to ask for it at all. The doctor was kind, professional, calm. I felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt under his hands, blood pressure cuff, and stethoscope. "You're lucky you came when you did," he said. Lucky? I wanted to tell him I wasn't lucky at all, that luck would have meant someone cared enough to notice before I almost didn't make it, that luck had been measured in gold jewelry and sacrifices no one ever acknowledged. But I didn't. I just nodded and let him talk. That night, alone in the hospital room, I thought of my son. I wanted to call him. I wanted to tell him everything, that my heart felt weak, my legs trembled, that the small failures of my body had grown too large to hide. But I couldn't, because the last words he said in a phone call were still sharp in my memory. "Mom, I can't always be worrying about you." Even now, in the sterile quiet of the hospital, those words echoed. So I stayed quiet. I let the nurses check my vitals. I let them administer medicine. I let them do what I could no longer do for myself. A nurse left the room for a moment, and I looked out the window. City lights shimmered in the night. I thought about the boy I raised, the one who had once clung to me at night, terrified of monsters under the bed. And I thought about the man he had become, the one who no longer saw me, the one who measured our relationship by convenience, not love. I wondered if he would even know if I didn't make it home, if the apartment stayed empty, if no one came by to check. And for the first time in years, I cried with anger, not at him, not at the world, but at the unfairness of it all, at the years I spent bending myself into shapes he could occupy, only to become invisible. The next morning, when I was discharged, I called him. My hand shook as I dialed. My heart raced in that familiar way it always did when I expected rejection. He answered, "Hey, Mom." I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to tell him everything. Instead, I said, quietly, "I'm okay. Just the doctor said I need to rest a little more." There was a pause. "Okay," he said finally. "Do you need anything?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I need you. But all I could say was, "No, I'm fine." And that was the moment I realized that years of sacrifice had trained me for this, to put his comfort above my own, even when my body begged for help, even when my heart ached to be seen. I hung up and sat in silence, listening to the city hum outside the window, and I understood something I had always refused to admit. Sometimes love is invisible, and sometimes it is ignored, and still we keep loving. The weeks after the hospital stay were the hardest. I realized I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. Simple things became mountains. Carrying groceries, climbing the stairs, even cooking dinner felt like a chore my body refused to obey. I still hadn't told my son. I told myself I couldn't, that he had his life, his work, his responsibilities. I was still the mother he could check off a list, not someone who needed him. But the body is honest when the heart isn't. One evening, as I struggled to pull a pot of soup off the stove, my ankle buckled. I fell, not dramatically, just quietly, but enough to send the pot clanging to the floor. The soup spilled, steaming and ruined. I sat there, hands pressed to the tile, staring at the mess, unable to move. I thought about calling him, about finally telling him that I couldn't do it all anymore. But I didn't. I just sat there, breathing shallowly, pretending to myself that pride could replace pain. It didn't. The next day, I called his sister-in-law. She was someone I trusted, someone in the family who still understood the invisible labor of a mother's life. I can't do it alone anymore," I admitted softly. My voice trembled. "I need someone to check in, just to help me with small things. I don't know what to do." She promised she'd come by occasionally, but she couldn't always. I knew that, and still, hearing her say it out loud was enough to let me feel human again, if only a little. The real test came when my son finally called. "Hey, Mom," he said. I almost froze. My throat tightened. All the weeks of silence, all the careful balancing of pride and exhaustion came crashing into a single heartbeat. "Hi," I said, quiet. "Listen, I heard about the hospital," he said, hesitation in his voice. "Are you okay?" I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Guilt? Fear? Relief? I couldn't tell. "I'm managing," I said, carefully, truthful enough but not too heavy. There was a long pause, and then the words I had dreaded, yet secretly hoped for. I didn't realize. "I know," I said, softly. "It's okay." It wasn't okay. It had never been okay, but I couldn't make him see it in that moment, not without risking the fragile connection that still remained. Later that night, I sat in my living room, the quiet apartment stretching around me like a hollow shell. I thought about the jewelry I sold for his college. I thought about every shift I worked, every skipped meal, every sleepless night. I realized that all my sacrifice had built him into the man he was, successful, independent, polite, but distant. I wondered if he knew, even for a second, how heavy the cost had been. I wondered if he felt it when he looked at me, and I wondered bitterly if he ever would. I began to write again, letters, not for him, but for myself, to remind myself that my love wasn't invisible, that my life, even when unacknowledged, had weight, that even if he didn't understand, I had been enough. The truth was painful. I had given everything, and now I was learning that giving everything didn't guarantee gratitude. It didn't guarantee love returned in equal measure, but it did guarantee something else, endurance. And for all the quiet heartbreak, for all the nights I spent waiting by the phone, I knew one thing. I was still here, still loving, still breathing, still surviving. Even when he didn't see me, even when I was a burden. It was a Thursday morning when he showed up at my door. Not a call, not a text, he just appeared. I wasn't expecting him. Part of me wanted to close the door, retreat into the apartment I had slowly learned to occupy alone, but another part, the part that had spent years hoping he would notice, let him in. He looked different, older, less certain of himself, and suddenly all those years of absence, all the times I had felt invisible, hit me again. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi," I said, keeping my voice steady. We sat down at the kitchen table. There was an awkward pause. He ran his face over like he was trying to organize his thoughts. I didn't realize," he started. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "About the hospital, about everything." I wanted to ask him, "Do you even know what everything is? Do you know the nights I stayed awake counting your breaths?" But I didn't. I let him talk. "I've been so busy," he continued, "with work, with life. I didn't see it. I didn't see you." I nodded slowly. I wanted to cry, but I held it back. I had spent too many years hiding. "I sold my jewelry for your college," I said quietly, testing the waters. "Do you know that? Every penny I could gather, every piece of me that I still had." He looked at me, really looked for the first time in years. His eyes softened. He swallowed hard. "I had no idea," he said. His voice cracked slightly. "Mom, Shh," I said, holding a hand. "Don't apologize, just listen." I told him the quiet parts of my life, the late nights working double shifts, the skipped meals, the fear, the loneliness, the dizziness I tried to hide, the apartment that felt empty without him noticing. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I just spoke. He sat there listening. For the first time, I felt him really hearing me. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. I hadn't felt that touch since he was a child, and it was both familiar and strange. "I've missed this," he said softly. I nodded. "Me too." It wasn't a dramatic apology, it wasn't a tearful confession, it was simply acknowledgement, a recognition that years of distance could be softened, if not completely erased, by presence and attention. We didn't talk about the jewelry I sold, or the nights I went hungry, or the exhaustion I had carried like armor. Those truths didn't need repeating. They existed in our silence, in the careful rebuilding of trust, in the small acts of noticing each other again. I realized that love is not always loud, it's not always recognized. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and heavy with history, and sometimes it takes years to understand the weight of it. But I had lived through it, I had survived it, and now, finally, I